Welcome back to PC-98 Paradise, the series where we take a close look at classic games for the NEC PC-98, the most popular Japanese PC series of the early 1990s. Most of the time on this channel, I cover games that have some sort of historical significance in the gaming world, or are related to another well-known series. But today I'm just doing a PC-98 title which is well known among PC-98 fans for being one of the handful of decent action games on the system. Personally, I've never gotten around to playing past the first stage of this one until now, despite having had it in my collection for the last 20 years. And seriously, aspiring metal bands? Apparently the name is totally open for the taking. The game has a full English patch that was released last year, but if you should choose to play this one for yourself, please be aware that this is an 18+ game, and there are some adult scenes. If you don't want to see that kind of thing, I'd recommend playing it with the visual scenes turned off completely. Obviously, this video is going to be totally PG, and I won't be covering the adult elements at all. But don't underestimate this one just because it's an adult game, because the quality of the gameplay here, I think, stands on its own. Well, at least for the PC-98. The game I'm talking about is Night Slave! Night Slave! Night Slave was released in 1996, making it a late release in the life of the system. This was an interesting time when a few companies were squeezing out the last ounces of power the system had, and experimenting with what could be done when taking advantage of the higher memory and faster CPUs that most PC-98 owners had on their systems by this time. The action games were in many ways unimpressive compared to the consoles of the time, but impressive compared to what had come before on this long-lived PC series intended primarily for business users. This was the scene when the adult game company Panda House, who had been making standard graphic adventure-style adult games up to this point, suddenly decided to try their hand at making a side-scrolling action game under one of their brand labels, Melody. There's even a section in the manual where the developers mention that people told them it was weird that they were suddenly making a robot action game and that it wouldn't fit their brand image. But they made it just because they wanted to. And I say, hell yeah, you go Panda House. Don't let other people tell you what you can and can't do. Make the game that you would want to play yourselves. So without further ado, let's take a look at their final product. The cover gives you a pretty good idea of what you're going to get. In the back, I can't really show you cause I swear they put screenshots from almost every adult scene in the game on there. Let's take a look inside. There's a registration card and a user support form. The manual is printed in blue and red on the inside. It has a lot of info on the characters and story, but I actually wish it had a little more info on how to play and what the options in the menu do. The game is stored on 10 floppy disks, and it might seem weird for 1996, but the game was even released on 5-inch floppy disk as well. While a lot of companies were only doing 3.5-inch releases by this time, there were still a handful of people using PC-98s that only had 5-inch drives, and some companies chose to continue to support those users. But one thing absolutely required to run Night Slave is a hard drive. There was no way they could have made this game run directly from the floppy disks. And so to install the game, we first boot into DOS from the hard drive and insert game disk A. We then find and run hdinst.exe, and after a couple of warnings we can ignore, we're greeted by a very cool installer. We select the floppy drive we're going to use for the install, and then the hard drive. The simple on-screen instructions will guide us through inserting each floppy disk in order. I love how this installer has icons for both 3.5 and 5-inch floppies, and even shows your remaining hard drive space. I also love the progress meters showing both the progress on the current floppy disk and for the whole installation. It goes rather quickly thanks to how the data is consolidated into single large files on each floppy disk. I think watching this installer sped up will make for some good oddly satisfying material. Finally, at the end, it asks if you'd like to make a boot disk, which I went ahead and did, just in case I might want one later. I love how it just copies DOS from your hard drive without even asking permission. And it turns out the game runs fine with my usual DOS environment, so I didn't end up using the boot disk. To start the game, you simply navigate to the Melody folder on your hard drive, and then the NS folder inside. ns.bat will start the game. This warning message you get here can just be dismissed by pressing any key, unless you find that the MIDI driver gives you issues, and then you can just disable it here by pressing 2. So finally, the game starts up with its trippy star pattern behind the logos and title screen. We can go into the configuration menu, but I'd recommend probably just leaving these all on the defaults for your first play. I'll go over what some of these do later in the video. So you start the game and choose one of the 3 data files for your game save. The game begins with a cutscene, and there's one between each stage. I wondered if this game was maybe going to have some adventure elements to it between the action stages, but no, you just watch and read it. I love the full screen graphics, but it's a little disappointing how much the game reuses the same 6 graphics depending on which of the main characters are talking. Since the facial expressions never change, it doesn't really work when they're supposed to be upset or excited. The cutscenes can get extremely long and text heavy, because they came up with one hell of a complicated world and plot for this mech action game. To explain it simply, it's the future, and the world is still reeling from a worldwide nuclear war 30 years ago, which wiped some unnamed Middle Eastern country from the map. In the aftermath, the world was consolidated into 4 countries: Pan-Americana, Euro-Africa, I'm just making this map up based on the names by the way, Asia, and Ration. I'm calling it Ration to reflect the way it's written in Japanese. Hell, I think they forgot Oceania and Eurasia. Yes, that was a 1984 reference. So anyway, after the war, the countries all agreed to cease all use of nuclear technology, including even nuclear power, though it's rumored that some of them secretly kept a few nukes. The world managed to achieve a delicate power balance, but is now threatened by an independent military organization made up of troops and officers from all of the world's disbanded militaries, the unfortunately named Slave Dog. To counter Slave Dog, a military organization called Steel Fox was formed, not by any world government, but rather by a private company called Neologic. So we'll play on the side of Steel Fox, specifically taking the role of Ray, who is a pilot of one of their mechanized suits, which they call Assault Gear. Under her direct command is another pilot named Chiho, and in addition there are 3 other pilots, Julia, Lania, and Nati. The Japanese writers probably didn't realize how weird the name Nati is. Then there's the top commander of Steel Fox, who doesn't really have a name and is referred to only as Officer.
But sir, in Project Mayhem we have no names.
And above her you have the representative from their corporate sponsor, Neologic, known simply as Goldman. Steel Fox has completed their training period and can now finally begin their attack on Slave Dog, called Operation Night Slave. And our first stage is an assault on one of their facilities in the mountains of North America. At the beginning of each mission, you can choose a gun and a subweapon, but you start with only one of each type. Later in the game, you will also get to equip one option. So now we can control the game, but we start off with a conversation between the 5 pilots before we can move forward. Text also appears sometimes during the gameplay. Nowadays, this would no doubt be accomplished with voices, since reading text while playing the game is really not ideal. Also, you can see the text layer screwing up the HUD during the dialogue. The view mode in the config menu is the screen refresh rate, and changing it to fastest will fix this, but it also makes the scrolling super jerky for me, so I'll just leave it on auto. The scrolling is not as smooth as a console game, but still pretty good for PC-98. Night Slave is immediately fun and impressive, including even recoil physics to really make you feel like you're controlling a heavy piece of machinery. Of course, that also means that the controls take more than a bit of getting used to, but it's definitely worth it. Some might be bothered that the jump and attack buttons are reversed, but I'm pretty flexible when it comes to controller layouts and can deal with it. And most people are going to be playing it on an emulator anyway. Yes, the game seems quite unique, until you realize that the gameplay is a complete ripoff of the SNES game Cybernator, aka Assault Suits Valken. Yeah, it's pretty blatant, from the way you aim your weapon to the dash and to the short hover you can perform in midair by holding the jump button. I think it's pretty safe to say that the developers at Panda House were fans of this game. But to their credit, I still think it's quite impressive what they managed to accomplish here on the PC-98, featuring even more explosions and shrapnel when shots connect with objects or terrain. Of course it lacks any parallax in the backgrounds, but come on, this is PC-98 here. And Panda House did change things up by using a completely different power-up system, which is copied from a completely different game, Gradius, or whatever. You pick up power-up capsules in order to buy your desired power-ups. The gun weapon and sub-weapon options are especially interesting since they function more like experience. You'll need to buy 4 of them to upgrade your gun, or 8 to upgrade your sub-weapon to level 2, and your progress will be carried over to the next stage. As you can see, you're going to need to pick up a lot of power-up capsules in order to actually improve any of the weapons. It's a constant trade-off, deciding whether to restore your energy to stay alive or save up for better weapons. I kept restarting stages, trying to do a perfect or near-perfect run, wasting as few power-up capsules on energy as possible. And then there's also the shield, which is a worthy alternative to buying energy. It lets you take quite a bit of damage before it's gone. It is kind of weird how it just shows you holding the shield when you have it and not using it to block anything. And finally, All-Round Bomber just destroys everything on screen. It's a waste of power-ups and should only be used if you accidentally pick up too many capsules without buying anything earlier on the list. I usually reach over to the keyboard and press C to buy power-ups, since the gamepad method of pressing down plus both trigger buttons is really unreliable. In fact, a couple of these controls listed in the manual appear to not be implemented in the final game at all. It says you can hold the direction of your shot by holding the jump button. Even if that worked, I don't think I would want to use it anyway. It does work with shift on the keyboard, or you can just change over to fixed shot in the configuration menu if you prefer. It's exciting to think what you could do with an emulator and a gamepad with more buttons here. And it would actually be extremely useful in this game if this reset function listed here by pressing escape plus Q was actually a thing, but unfortunately it doesn't do anything. The stages in the game are generally quite long, and once you get past the first section of Stage 1, you'll find yourself inside a base. Things may seem a bit maze-like here, but it's actually pretty straightforward, and you'll find the way through. You'll want to search around for as many power-up capsules as you can find, though. For the boss, you can either have a harrowing battle on the ground, or a slow and easy one by staying up here on this platform. In the second cutscene, we learn that Chiho, the pilot under Rei's command, lost consciousness while piloting her assault gear during the previous battle, and Lania wants her removed from the operation. After all, Chiho is just a test pilot who was assigned to the operation by Neologic, but Rei steps in to defend Chiho and give her another chance, since on the other hand, she was added to the team because she has displayed innate abilities to pilot her prototype assault gear using her mind. In the next part of the cutscene, we are introduced to the bad guys, Slave Dog. Their leader is a man named Denitz, and their star assault gear pilot is a girl named Erika, and under her command are 2 pilots named Emily and Ange. These 2 also display innate abilities to pilot their assault gears like Chiho. Wait a second, what are they wearing? Is this a porno? Oh yeah, that's right, it is. Stage 2 takes place at the Panama Canal, where Slave Dog is carrying out an attack on a Pan America naval base. This stage is actually a little easier than the first in my opinion. At the end, Rei will meet Erika, and I guess we'd better put a spoiler warning here before moving on. So if you're planning on playing this game, maybe with the awesome English patch applied, then you might want to skip this section of the video. It turns out that Rei and Erika have a history together. In fact, Erika was raised by Rei's father after her parents died. So the 2 of them were sisters, and only figured out that they weren't biologically related when they got older. And by the way, Erika likes Rei. No, I mean really likes her, if you know what I mean. So the two of them are of course upset to learn here that they're now enemies, but Erika ends up making a retreat when Chiho comes to save Rei. After completing this mission, I got my first alternate weapon, the bazooka, but it can actually be obtained at the end of the first stage if you get over 100,000 points. At first the recoil and slow speed of this weapon sucks, but it can be kind of useful if you level it up. In the next cutscene, we learn that Chiho is also really into Rei, and is now super jealous, wondering just what kind of past Rei and Erika have together, since at this point Rei hasn't told Chiho anything. Chiho takes off in her assault gear without permission in order to go find Slave Dog and Erika on her own. She ends up quickly getting captured and interrogated by them, but I can't show it. In the next stage, Steel Fox is investigating a weapons facility and Chiho is believed to be being held nearby, so Rei is allowed to search for her during the mission. She finds her, but also Erika, and they fight. Erika retreats after being defeated and Rei recovers Chiho. Chiho, of course, deserves to be removed from the operation, but for some reason this time Lania, the same one who originally wanted her removed, comes to her defense and she somehow gets to stay. Wow, this is not a very professional operation here. In the next stage, Rei is investigating a top-secret former Ration military research facility, which turns out to be a biological weapons lab where they've accidentally developed alien eggs, facehuggers, and xenomorphs. This is actually a very cool stage where you can get a lot of power-ups if you destroy all the eggs, but it's also a bit difficult. Inside, Rei runs into Erika again, and considering their dangerous surroundings, they decide to call a temporary truce and explore the facility together. Erika follows you around and helps you with her powerful shot, but unfortunately she's too stupid to aim it in the right direction most of the time. At the end, Erika is captured by the Queen, and Rei has to destroy her without killing Erika, which is really hard to do, especially if you have the homing missiles equipped. If Erika dies, it's game over. Eventually I succeeded in saving Erika, but it doesn't really show what happens, and the next time we see her, she's back at enemy base. The next stage changes things up a bit. This one has a very small area where you just have to survive waves of enemies and eventually defeat a boss. You can obtain a lot of power-ups here if you prioritize the enemies which leave them behind. For the next stage, Steel Fox is assigned with saving the daughter of the Ration president, who is kidnapped by Slave Dog, and we play a desert stage near their home base in the ruins of the unnamed country that was destroyed in the war. I found the game actually gets a lot easier here in the later stages. Erika betrays her own side by handing the president's daughter over to Rei, but Emily and Ange stop her. Before the boss, the president's daughter in the capsule simply disappears, but she supposedly dies here. We find out after the stage that she wasn't the real president's daughter, but rather a clone called a memory doll, who knew the Ration government's secrets. So our mission all along was actually to destroy her, not save her. But only the president and the Steel Fox officer knew that. Our heroes feel conflicted when they learn this, to say the least. In the next mission, Slave Dog have acquired a powerful nuclear warhead, and we have to take their airborne forces out before they fire it. You're given an option called the Flight Unit, which allows your assault gear to fly infinitely. And for the boss of this stage, the game becomes basically a shmup, where you can aim your weapon in any direction. Denitz himself is inside this ship, so destroying it means the end of Slave Dog. But even after Slave Dog is gone, Officer has figured out the real enemy and confronts Goldman, who she has figured out was supplying weapons to not only Steel Fox, but to Slave Dog as well. He was nothing but a war profiteer working both sides. So the final objective will be to take out Neologic at their space colony base. And so we get a whole shmup stage, followed by a platformer maze aboard the colony. This one has a lot of power-up capsules to find, and there's a part at the very end where you can even farm for capsules for quite a while. The enemies do eventually stop spawning, though. At the end of the stage, Erika has been left here as bait, and we'll fight Emily and Ange to finish them off for good. Chiho drops in from above, and we leave Erika there. The stage ends, and in the cutscene they confront Goldman, who reveals his collection of machine children, biologically manufactured human weapons. and we learn that Chiho herself is a machine child, and that's why she had special assault suit piloting abilities and was assigned to Steel Fox by Neo Logic. Emily and Ange were machine children as well. Ray tells Chiho that she loves her regardless of what she is. The machine children restrain Ray and Chiho while Goldman is explaining everything, and when he tries to shoot Ray, Erika steps in to take the bullet. They have a heartfelt goodbye, and then we're thrown into the 9th and final stage, which is pretty much just the end boss. Goldman goes running to the space colony's central brain, who is named Geo, but who he calls Mama. Geo, having no use for him anymore, simply eliminates him. Chiho realizes that Geo is basically her mother, and while she is feeling a bit conflicted, Geo simply takes control of Chiho's mind, and Ray has to fight her. But this is just a quick fight before the real battle with Geo, who is at first invulnerable thanks to a protective field. The 3 remaining members of Steel Fox, Julia, Lania, and Naughty, sacrifice themselves in order to destroy the field. We then have to fight the several phases of the end boss. Now, if you've been leveling up the laser weapon throughout the game, then you might find this end boss to be really easy, but unfortunately for me, I had been sticking to the standard assault rifle throughout the game, which works only okay here. On top of that, I had been leveling up the D-mine as my sub-weapon, which doesn't work while flying at all, so I had a difficult battle ahead of me. In my opinion, this part turns out to be the absolute worst part of the game if you're unprepared, because while the cutscenes throughout the game are skippable with the escape key, all of the dialogue shown in the game engine isn't. You have to literally wait about 8 or 9 minutes every time you fail at the end boss in order to retry. And to make things worse, you can't even just leave the game running for that whole time, since there are multiple parts where you need to pick up the controller, like the short fight with Chiho. This is just awful. If only they had made some way to skip the dialogue or at least make it go faster. In my opinion, the game designers really dropped the ball here and managed to create a nearly unacceptable player experience for the last stage. By my 9th attempt, I had almost decided to just start the whole game over from the beginning, but finally managed to beat it. And even after all that, Geo is still not destroyed. She says she is going to use one of her defense satellites to destroy the ozone layer, thus destroying all life on Earth. Ray finds only one escape shuttle and makes the decision to save Chiho while she stays aboard to destroy Geo. Chiho says it should be the other way around, since after all she's just a machine child created by Geo, but Ray insists. She goes to destroy Geo, who looks a lot like Mother Brain from Metroid to me.
I could have done better, and I don't even have a button!
Since she's already shown that she can control Chiho's mind, I'd say that Ray made the right decision here. You get to control Ray as she fires the single shot it takes to kill Geo. The space colony explodes with Ray aboard, we see Chiho escaping, and I guess the world is saved. The credits roll, and man do I like this sort of sad ending. It gives the game an appropriately dark edge. I mean, how many of the main characters are even left alive in the end? Just Chiho and the officer? At the very end of the credits, it does show part of what I think is supposed to be Ray's assault suit floating past the Earth. Maybe it's open to interpretation, but I choose to believe that this isn't meant to mean that Ray might still be alive. It's just a bittersweet reminder of her sacrifice. The melancholy refrain of what I guess is the game's main theme playing over it is just perfect. And speaking of the music, the only person really of note here in the credits is the music composer and arranger, credited here as Panda. The rest of the staff only seem to have worked at Panda House on other adult games, as far as I can tell. And it's really impressive that they managed to make an action game of this quality on the PC-98. As for who this Panda is, he seems to have been considered the president or at least the main representative of Panda House, and described himself on the now defunct Panda House homepage as a pianist who loves Winnie the Pooh. His real name is Izuho Yoshitani, and he does have a few game music credits to his name. For Night Slave, he did an incredible job with the PC-98's old monaural soundboard. It's really hard to tell that there are only 6 sound channels being used here. The music goes perfectly with a heavy mech suit walking around. The FM2 option in the config menu got me excited that maybe this was the setting for the stereo soundboard 86, but actually all it does is make the SSG channels louder. The music sounds right to me with the FM1 setting, and the FM2 setting I think is probably only intended for some third-party FM soundboards. In 1996, there was really no good excuse for not supporting the soundboard 86 in my opinion, but I'm sure they felt it wasn't really worth the effort. Cause while there were plenty of soundboard 86 adopters by this time, the old monaural soundboard was the one you could be sure that virtually all PC-98 gamers had access to. I think it's a shame, but at least there is GS MIDI support. So let's briefly see what that sounds like compared to the FM. By the way, I recently managed to get my hands on the highly sought after CM500, which is the only MIDI module Roland ever produced that can do both GS and LA MIDI in one unit. I'll be able to really take advantage of this thing next time I cover a game that has both GS and LA MIDI, but today let's just use it to hear Night Slave's GS MIDI. As for ports of Night Slave, unfortunately there aren't any. It was meant to be a PC-98 game, and that's it. Night Slave is a great mech action platformer, though it has its issues. As I mentioned, the amount of wait time between each attempt at the end boss is ridiculous. The gameplay is copied from another game, and the game balance could have used some work. The first half of the game overall felt more difficult to me than the latter stages. There are even a couple of very short bonus stages, one that can be unlocked by scoring a certain number of points by the end of stage 3, I think 300,000, and the other apparently only appears on your second playthrough after clearing the game. I wish the game was a little more transparent about the requirements, because there's not even anything indicating that the game has a second loop at all. I think what really could have improved the game though is some sort of new game plus. How cool would it be if you could start over from the beginning with all your weapon upgrades? Then not only could you try to upgrade all the weapons you didn't get around to in your first playthrough, but you could also have fun kicking ass with strong weapons like the laser in the earlier stages. That would have increased the replay value tenfold, and really elevated this title to the next level. It just feels like such a wasted opportunity that surely could have been implemented relatively easily. As it is, there is maybe some fun to be had trying to 1cc the game. I ended up continuing 25 times in my first playthrough, but finishing the game all in one go does seem very doable with some practice. I did manage to finish the game only continuing once in a later playthrough. At any rate, there's no denying that this is an impressive action game on the PC-98. I hate to use the phrase, good for a PC-98 game, but yeah, that's pretty much what this is. Still, even considering all the games, old and new, that we all have access to nowadays, I think that if this particular combination of platforming gameplay, wordy geopolitical sci-fi plot, PC-98 pixel art, and maybe some adult scenes, appeals to you, then Night Slave is definitely worth checking out. Thanks for watching this episode of PC-98 Paradise. This video was a request from my longtime patron, Tuberculosis. Thanks to all my patrons for continuing to make this channel possible. And thanks to all of you for liking, subscribing, commenting, and for choosing to watch this video. See you next time.